He nodded, continuing to paint, the brush moving carefully over the canvas. Love isn't perfect, he said. It's messy, painful, sometimes unfair. But it's also real. And that, right there, that's what matters. She stepped closer, finally reaching out to touch his shoulder. No promises were made. No ilusiones restored. But in that single gesture was understanding, forgiveness, and the acknowledgement that human hearts, though fragile, could endure. Ethan glanced at her, a faint smile breaking through the weariness. Let's take it one day at a time, he said. Together? She asked. Yes. Together, he confirmed. Outside, the town stirred with life. Children laughed, neighbors greeted each other, and the sun touched every rooftop with gold. Inside, two people, marked by mistakes and pain, chose presence over abandonment, truth over pretense, and the quiet courage of staying. They didn't have answers. They didn't have guarantees. But they had each other. And sometimes that alone was enough. The brush moved steadily across the canvas. A portrait forming from shadow and light, fractured lines woven into beauty. And in that art, Ethan captured not just a woman, a life, or a marriage, but the enduring resilience of love itself. Imperfect, human, and painfully real. The house was quiet, but not empty. For the first time in a long time, it felt like home. Outside, the town lay under a soft blanket of snow. Footprints had been made, some erased, some left behind. Inside, Ethan and Lena sat in quiet contemplation, understanding that the paths ahead would be difficult, painful, and uncertain, but shared in some small, unspoken way. Ethan finally rose, heading toward the studio, paintbrushes and canvases in hand. Lena watched him go, heart heavy with guilt, regret, and something else. Hope, faint but stubborn, like light through frost. In that moment, silence was not emptiness. It was recognition, understanding, and the first fragile spark of something that might, someday, be called forgiveness. And for now, that was enough. Ending part, emotional conclusion of Shades of Silence. Spring arrived quietly over Maple Hollow, soft sunlight warming the streets and melting the remnants of winter snow. Inside the Sutherland home, the air was different. Tense, yes, but also heavier with honesty and fragile understanding. Ethan sat in his studio, brushes in hand, staring at a blank canvas. The months of struggle, betrayal, and quiet despair had left scars that no paint could erase, but his love, his commitment, and his own resolve had not. Slowly he began to paint again, not to escape, but to remember, to process, to rebuild. Lena stood in the doorway, watching him. She had made choices she would carry for the rest of her life. Choices that had caused pain, confusion, and heartbreak. Nathan had faded from her life almost as quickly as he had entered it, leaving her with the weight of her own mistakes. She had felt used, empty, and guilty, but in the absence of illusions, she also felt clarity. Ethan didn't look at her as she approached. Instead, he spoke without turning, voice quiet but steady. I don't know if we'll ever be what we were. Maybe we can't. But we're still here. That counts for something. Lena swallowed hard. I never stopped caring, Ethan. I just lost myself for a while. And in the distance, the faint glow of the studio light signaled Ethan's quiet return to his work. Painting, reaching, trying to rebuild the fragments of a life that had once seemed whole. Lena watched him, tears silently falling, knowing that whatever came next, they had crossed a threshold that could never be ignored, yet perhaps could one day be understood. Part 2, Emotional Midpoint Conclusion. The morning sun slanted weakly through the blinds, painting pale lines across the kitchen table. Ethan sat there, untouched coffee growing cold, his sketchpad open but blank. He traced the edges of the paper with a finger, thinking of the months that had passed, months of distance, silence, and quiet heartbreak. Lena entered the room, her hair messy, her eyes red. I'm sorry, she whispered finally. Ethan didn't look up immediately. He let the words hang in the air, heavy with months of unspoken truths. Then he said softly, I know. The admission was not a forgiveness. Not yet. But it was acknowledgement. The recognition of love strained, mistakes made, hearts broken, and trust fractured. They sat across from each other in silence. The weight between them was palpable, but it was no longer cold or empty. It was real. Sleepless nights. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she just stood there, watching him as if waiting for some invisible signal to cross. The night stretched on, heavy cold, but alive with the raw, fragile pulse of love, loss, and the choices that define us. I don't know what comes next, Ethan said, finally meeting her gaze. Maybe we rebuild. Maybe we don't. But pretending nothing happened. That's not who we are. Lena nodded, tears spilling freely now. I never stopped caring, Ethan. Not for a second. For the first time in months, the room felt like a place where truth could live. Love was fragile, imperfect, human, but still present, still breathing. Look at me, he interrupted, voice trembling. She did. And in that moment, he saw not only her fear but her regret, her longing, and the painful awareness that she had allowed herself to be used, even if unintentionally. I wanted to feel alive again, she admitted softly. And I thought I could find it somewhere else. But it wasn't love, Ethan. Not like ours. Not like what we had. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak. It all burned, but beneath it, there was something else. Recognition, acceptance, and the first fragile thread of understanding. I don't know if we can fix this, he said, voice low. I don't even know if we want to. But I know that pretending it didn't happen, that's not an option anymore. She nodded, trembling. I know. I just want you to know I never stopped caring. Not for a second. For the first time in months, silence between them felt heavy with truth rather than emptiness. The distance remained, yes, but it was now a shared awareness rather than a secret gulf. They sat side by side on the edge of the bed. Hands almost touching but not quite, each lost in thought. Ethan finally spoke again. I love you. That doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's enough. But I need to know you understand what this cost us. Lena whispered. And I hate myself for it. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the town in white, covering footprints but not scars. In that quiet, suspended moment, they both realized that love was no longer simple. It was fragile, human, and painfully real. They didn't embrace, didn't speak further. But for the first time in months, the room felt less like a battlefield and more like a place where truth could live, even if healing would come slowly, if at all. It's complicated, she said, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't mean to. He exhaled, closing his eyes. I know. They sat in silence for what felt like hours. Neither moved. The room smelled of paint, coffee, and something darker. Betrayal, regret, the unbearable weight of truths finally spoken. Lena realized in that moment that Nathan had been giving her attention, validation, and charm, but not love. And Ethan, despite everything, had loved her without condition, without manipulation, without design. The truth was suffocating. Yet she couldn't undo it. Not yet. Ethan stood eventually, walking toward his studio. Lena followed, unsure, hesitant, wanting to reach out but afraid. He didn't turn around. I need space, he said quietly. And for the first time in years, Lena understood the fragility of what they had. Love had always been there, but it was not indestructible. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in white, erasing footprints but not mistakes. Part 2, Segment 4, Emotional Conclusion. The house felt colder than ever that night. Ethan sat at the edge of the bed, sleeves rolled up, paint still drying under his fingernails. He stared at the floorboards as though they could explain everything. The lies, the distance, the quiet decay of a life he had thought was shared. Lena hovered near the doorway, wrapped in a shawl that smelled faintly of Nathan's cologne. Her eyes were wide, searching, but full of exhaustion, of a guilt she could no longer run from. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch, letting the weight of their unspoken months settle over them. Then slowly he said, Love isn't supposed to feel like this. Tears sprang to her eyes. I know. You're perfect for this project, he said, voice smooth. Your talent shines. But remember, it's only valuable as long as you follow my guidance. She swallowed hard, a knot forming in her stomach. She had always suspected, deep down, that she was being used, but hearing it whispered so casually felt like ice sliding into her chest. Yet when she left his office that night, snow falling silently on the pavement, she felt a strange, inexplicable pull toward him. Ethan existed in her life, yes, but Nathan made her feel noticed. And in those quiet, desperate moments, that feeling was addictive. The tension at home grew unbearable. Ethan's silence became more pronounced, his mood darker, his paintbrush a weapon against the emptiness between them. Lena avoided his gaze, her own guilt gnawing at her under the layers of desire and need for attention. One evening, Ethan found her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. A message preview glowed. "Nathan. Can't wait to see you tonight." He stared at it for a long time, cold clarity settling in. It wasn't just emotional distance anymore. It was deliberate, calculated. When Lena returned home later, Ethan didn't speak immediately. He sat at the table, staring at her like someone staring into a slowly burning fire, measuring the damage. "Where were you?" he asked finally, voice quiet but firm. She hesitated. "Just downtown. Work stuff." "You're lying," he said, each word deliberate, each one a weight. Lena's heart raced. She had imagined this confrontation countless times, but now that it was here, she felt paralyzed. Ethan shook his head. "No. I don't want excuses. I want truth." For the first time in months, Lena felt fear. Not just guilt, but the raw, exposed fear of losing something she hadn't even realized she'd been holding on to. I met someone," she admitted quietly, barely above a whisper. "It's not. I didn't." But she ignored them, convinced that it was still better than the suffocating void she felt at home. And in the quiet evenings as Ethan slept, Lena lay awake thinking of him, feeling the sharp duality of guilt and desire. The very tension that would soon bring everything to the surface. Part 2, Segment 3. February's gray skies pressed down over Maple Hollow, leaving the town in a muted, almost lifeless haze. Inside the Sutherland home, the atmosphere mirrored the weather. Cold, dim, and heavy with things left unsaid. Ethan had begun keeping careful track of small details. The way Lena's texts disappeared before he could see them. The faint traces of cologne that lingered too long on her coat. The unexplained hours she spent at work, when nothing required her presence. Each detail alone was insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern he could no longer ignore. One night, he followed her quietly after dinner. She claimed she was attending a gallery meeting downtown. He drove behind her, keeping a safe distance, heart pounding. She parked at a small cafe he didn't recognize, then disappeared inside. From the car, he could see Nathan greeting her at the door, hand extended, warm smile spreading across his face. Ethan's chest tightened. The evidence he had suspected, the quiet gnawing in the pit of his stomach, was real. She was with him. Not physically, not yet fully, but emotionally. Returning home, he tried to focus on painting. But the colors on the canvas blurred, his brush strokes jittery and uneven. Faces dissolved into shadows more quickly than he intended. Hands reaching toward something he could no longer name. He couldn't confront her yet. Not tonight. Lena, meanwhile, began noticing cracks in the carefully constructed charm Nathan displayed. One evening, as he leaned in too closely, brushing a strand of hair from her face, she caught a flash of impatience in his eyes. An almost imperceptible shift that reminded her that the warmth she felt was condition. "Oh, just a gift for a client," she said quickly, too quickly. Her eyes flicked away from his. Ethan nodded slowly, but a pit formed in his stomach. The pattern was clear. The distance wasn't just emotional, it was tangible. Someone else was stepping into the space he had thought belonged only to them. Yet he couldn't confront her directly, not yet. Doing so might destroy what remained of their fragile coexistence. Instead, he observed, quietly, silently, watching her movements and the subtle changes in her behavior. A week later, Lena invited Nathan over to her apartment late one night. Ethan was at the studio, painting, unaware of the full extent of the intrusion. They spoke in hushed tones, laughter and murmurs spilling from the small living room. She felt